Okay, what's going on, guys? I know that I know that congratulations on the new venture. Let's get started on that. You guys started a new thing called Drop Site
We
News.
did. Yep. Dropsitenews.com. We even have a URL. This is day 5 of the new thing, and it feels great. Like I thought, I figured. I don't know, Jeremy, how you were feeling about it, but I kind of figured we would know within 24 to 48 hours whether we were going to crash into the mountain, and this was just like the worst decision we'd ever made, or if it was going to, get altitude. And I couldn't be happier about how the first week has gone.
Hell yeah! Well, congratulations. I'm very excited to see what you guys have done. You're already coming out with some pretty bold coverage so far, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Obviously, some of the things that you guys are working on. But before we get to that, before we get to Israel, Palestine, I guess like a good way to get into that, as a matter of fact, is Biden's ridiculous presser yesterday. Big hyper focus on foreign policy as expected. This is Biden's bread and butter. This is what he feels very comfortable talking about. Many conversations have been had over the way that he was able to speak on these issues. But I fear not a lot of conversations have been had about how bad the Democratic Party's foreign policy is in general. So, I wanted to have you guys on to talk about that a little bit, to address that a little bit in the wake of NATO's 75-year anniversary.
Yeah, the part that really blew my mind about the kind of Democratic operative class's response, that like this guy, he actually has a foreign affairs PhD, is all he did was sometimes like name the countries correctly.
Yeah.
That was basically it. There was this one question from one of the reporters who said, "Look, hey, 2 years ago, you said that your sanctions policy against Russia was going to destroy the country. We at the time said to you, aren't you a little bit concerned that what you're doing with sanctions policy with regard to Russia is actually going to just tighten the bonds between China and Russia, and won't actually have the effect that you want it to have?" And you said no, but you were confident. Well, here we are 2 years later, and Russia and China are tighter than ever. So what are you going to do to disrupt this alliance that you accidentally created? And his answer was just complete gibberish, like just gobbledygook. And so I don't see how you get to be a foreign policy kind of PhD when your own policies are just blowing back in your face, even on their own terms. It's kind of sad what passes for kind of a foreign policy ace in Washington.
Yeah, I think when it comes to American foreign policy, I feel like the defense contractors in general just simply want a guy who will say the talking points, and like, even if Donald Trump himself is not going to legitimately, blow up NATO in the way that people posture against Donald Trump, the fact that like his sentiment, the fact that he expresses like divisive rhetoric on foreign policy is enough for the DMV voters, the most important voters, the most significant constituency, the defense industry constituency, to say, oh, Donald Trump spells trouble for America's prospects in the future. And Biden is definitely better than Donald Trump on that front, is how they operate, in my opinion.
When people say this, they fearmonger. Oh, Trump is going to be worse on Palestine, or oh, just imagine if Trump was president. We can have a discussion, and I covered Trump's foreign policy, military policy extensively. But what is that really doing? That is an attempt to remove Biden's responsibility for the genocide that he's currently enabling at this moment. I mean, think about the intellectual and moral bankruptcy involved with saying, but Trump will be worse, because inherent to that is implying that it's, what Biden is doing is acceptable, is an acceptable alternative to Trump.
Yeah.
And the fact is that, we don't actually know how many people have been killed in Gaza. 40,000 is the conservative estimate that has been put out by the health ministry in Gaza, a health ministry that's been devastated, that is, its ability to actually track dead bodies is very limited. I was recently in Turkey, and I was doing some interviews there, and I was with a family. Two of the individuals from that family from Gaza, a mother and her daughter, had been pulled out of the rubble of their building, and they managed to be evacuated, from Gaza. I mean, the scope of what Joe Biden has facilitated, armed, bankrolled, offered political, diplomatic, legal support, the scope of the utter devastation that this man has unleashed on the people of Gaza should never be forgotten or forgiven. So when people say, well, Trump would be worse, that's not the conversation to have right now. The conversation to have right now is, what have you done and what are you doing to stop this genocide?
Absolutely.
And I've been, I broke two stories this week. I've been working for a sustained period on examining Hamas's view of the past 9 months of the events of October 7th. And we can talk about that in depth later if you want, but just one bit of analysis that's relevant to things that happened yesterday at the press conference and then today on Biden's official Twitter feed, the POTUS Twitter feed. Biden is putting out and he's saying, well, we have an agreement on a framework for ceasefire negotiations. My understanding from people within Hamas is that Hamas and other groups that are participating in a consultative process about what position Hamas is going to take in the negotiations. There's several armed factions that have been joining in the fighting against Israel in Gaza, and they have authorized Hamas to be the negotiator on behalf of all those groups. This level of nuance is never mentioned in the U.S. press, but it's not just Hamas, and they have their own way of processing decision making. And what they're saying is, from their perspective, they are willing to make what would be a significant concession. What Hamas is saying is that they have an agreement that they can put on the table, that they are willing to engage in a phased ceasefire. Typically, what Hamas's position has been is they will only enter a ceasefire negotiation if there is a clear path to an end to Israel's aggression against Gaza. What they are saying now is that they are willing to entertain the possibility of an initial 6-week phase where there would be a ceasefire. And during this time, there would be an exchange of captives. The women and civilians that Hamas is holding and female soldiers would be handed over to Israel. And in return, Israel would free as many as 900 Palestinians who are being held in Israeli jails, prisons, and administrative detention. And among these, my understanding is that there would be somewhere in the ballpark of 150 people that are serving lengthy prison sentences, people that Hamas would consider to be sort of more political prisoners. But Hamas's condition to the mediators is that if we are willing to pull back this insistence that there has to, at the start, be a guarantee of a permanent ceasefire and a withdrawal of Israeli forces, that it's clearly defined, we want the guarantors, the United States, Qatar, and Egypt, to certify that Israel will maintain that ceasefire as we negotiate the second phase of the agreement. And in the second phase of the agreement, Israel and the United States are insisting that all of the remaining captives in Gaza be handed over to Israel, including male soldiers. And Hamas, in return, would get prisoners freed from Israeli prison who are referred to as the impossibles, people who are in Israeli prisons because they're members of armed resistance groups or because they have killed Israelis, or they've been sentenced for killing Israelis. Now, the nuance here is that Hamas has not formally agreed to this right now. Hamas has said, we are willing to move forward with this, but we need those kinds of guarantees. And now we get to Biden last night at his press conference at NATO. He says, well, Hamas and Israel have agreed on a framework for the negotiations. And then he tweeted it this afternoon, and then you had journalists in Washington running around and saying, oh my God, Biden has secured the ceasefire deal. What I think is happening here is that they're doing a front run on Hamas. And what they're trying to do is say that an agreement has been finalized, that my understanding as of now is that it has not been finalized on the framework, and that they want to try to create a situation where if Hamas now says, well, wait a minute, we didn't get the guarantees we were asking for, they are going to say Hamas once again has sabotaged the process that the Israelis and the Americans have engaged in. I go to the great lengths to explain this in detail, Hasan, because so much of the reporting is a cartoon version of what is actually happening.
Yeah.
And that goes from, the origin story of what happened on October 7th all the way to the present moment. And Israel, the final thing I'll say is, my understanding is Israel is also now trying to add conditions that were not even in the document that Israel itself submitted to Biden and that Biden has been promoting. So, I've studied this very closely. I'm talking to primary people. I've also spoken to Israeli negotiators, and I have the very clear sense that Hamas is exhibiting a tremendous amount of flexibility, and it's the Israelis that are intentionally trying to sabotage a deal, because I don't think that Netanyahu is truly interested in freeing the hostages. I think he's primarily interested in annihilating the Palestinians of Gaza.
Absolutely. I mean, this is perhaps best represented in the past, 2 months now, since Biden's revelation of the three-phase negotiation plan, ceasefire proposal with a permanent end of the hostilities proposal that he claimed from the start was Israel's own proposal, that Hamas was actually sullying, which, if you pay even a little bit of attention to Israeli news, was exactly the opposite, where even if this was a proposal that Israel tried to, at least through legalese, hide the more nefarious elements on, they very openly, in the way that they were communicating to their own citizens, were very much against it. There has never been a moment where Benjamin Netanyahu, let alone his own members of his own party in the Knesset, has ever actually thought that this was a good proposal. They were the ones who were refusing. Hamas and Hamas leadership and other envoys routinely said that they were actually very much in favor of this negotiation because it was identical. Even John Kirby himself, it wasn't John Kirby, sorry. Blinken himself actually admitted that this was identical to the Hamas proposal presented in February in one of his conversations. So, ultimately, it has always been the Israeli side that has refused to negotiate in good faith, and yet the narrative that the White House and the narrative that the media has went along with from the White House was always that it was Hamas that was ruining the proposal. So I suspect that is what they're trying to gear up for by adding additional claims onto it. And I do fear that now, because the entire conversation is revolving around Biden's ineptitude and Biden's cognitive decline, that the media interest, the media appetite in covering what's going on in Gaza is taking a back seat to that, even though these two conversations, in my opinion, should be had together. Because time and time again, Biden's mental decline has played a formative role in shaping the narrative. Like on October 8 or 9 or, early on in October when he came out and said he saw 40 beheaded babies. He saw the pictures and then reiterated that position where he said he saw a family being lit on fire only as recently as a couple months ago. None of these things are real. And his staffers, every step of the way, would go to the media and be like, he didn't see that. We don't know where he came from. We don't know where this information is coming from. It's just like a manifestation in his own
And
mind.
he said this thing last night. Then he, at the press conference, then he says, look at my numbers in Israel. He's like, and, I mean, it's like when you're in the position that Biden's in, he's basically saying, like, look at my poll numbers in Israel.
Yeah.
But one other thing is, and we make this point in the drop site reporting, that both Biden and Netanyahu's political futures are woven into this situation right now. But I think for Netanyahu, there's a popular line that's sort of that Netanyahu wants to stretch this along because he's under criminal investigation in Israel. His popularity is going down. He already was kind of on the ropes politically, and he needs to stretch this on because then he loses power. I think that's true to an extent. It's a factor. But I think there's something much more sinister at play with why Netanyahu wants to stretch this on. And it's that he sees this as his historic legacy, that he can actually, go full in. He can erase Gaza as a Palestinian territory. And I think that is a much darker reality than he's just trying to hold on to power. He's trying to hold on to power as a kind of cynical, Washington style view of it. This is not House of Cards. This is much worse. This is someone who has genocidal intent, whose entire life project was prevent the establishment of a unified Palestinian state and to annihilate Palestinians who refuse to submit to apartheid.
Yeah. Also, one more statement about the ridiculousness of claiming that you are more popular in Israel than you are in the United States is that Donald Trump, according to a poll published last week on Channel 12, is actually more popular than Biden. Channel 12 found that 48% of Israelis prefer Donald Trump to be the next U.S. president compared to 27% who prefer Biden. So, like, he's wrong on every account. And it's obviously a ridiculous thing to fucking say, oh, I'm more popular in Israel than I am here, which is like, you're not running for president in Israel, okay? The fuck? Why would you ever say that? But regardless, Donald Trump is ironically more popular in Israel than he is. So there it is.
Oh, and of course he is, because if Biden, pauses 2,000 pound bomb shipment for 1 week, then it's a huge betrayal, and Israeli politicians talk about how they need to reevaluate their entire relationship with the Democratic Party. How could they possibly do this? And so you would have to bear hug and bear hug only the entire time. Like you say one thing critical, you're going to be down in the 20s. And it's hilarious, that he's almost losing 2-1 to Trump. Hopefully he's closer to Trump in the U.S. than he is in Israel.
Well, the thing is, also, of course, Trump is more popular in Israel. Israel somehow is even more reactionary than the United States of America in their politics. Yes. They are currently directly participating, not by way of like our defense contracts or anything, but directly participating in an ethnic cleansing campaign. Of course, they're fucking significantly more reactionary and prefer Donald Trump. Anyway. But yeah, the reason why I bring this up is because I think it is a bullshit narrative to claim that Biden is this brilliant elder statesman who has done a phenomenal job in terms of foreign policy. Israel being one of the most obvious instances where his foreign policy flub is the most glaring, in my opinion. The bear-hugging Netanyahu strategy, as you guys also pointed out, has been a genuine fucking failure from the start. Excuse me, I'm sorry for cursing. I know your mother is watching, Jeremy, but
always.
Yeah, but it's just objectively ridiculous. But as long as he just says the right things and doesn't call Zelensky President Putin, the media is going to go, oh yeah, no, he's actually he's being so presidential. This is like in the early Trump era when all of these like CNN commentators like Van Jones, former Maoist Van Jones, would come out and be like, this is Trump's presidential moment. He's appearing presidential. They're doing that now for Biden. And you can tell when The Hill and NPR and all these other like mainstream institutions are saying like maybe the poor debate may not have hurt Biden as much as we previously thought, and they're doing pickup.
My mom just texted me. My mom just texted me. Why are all these people saying hello to me now?
Oh, yeah. Everyone in the chat is.
You guys are making her night, man. She watches everything I do. She caught me once on this show, and now she randomly watches it. It's kind of amazing.
Hell yeah, that's awesome.
Hi, Jeremy's mom.
Anyway, but
what you're saying, I mean, but this is also true. Like I think, to be president of the United States, to one degree or another, you're a sociopath, or you become one very abruptly. And Joe Biden's entire career, and we've talked about it on this show before. I mean, Joe Biden's entire career when it comes to Israel has just been a continuous defense of the most extreme criminality of the Israeli state. And he's constantly reiterating, that his relationship with Israel began sitting across from Golda Meir. And, there's a whole other story about how he exaggerated what happened in his meetings with Golda Meir. But, I think there's real questions about to what extent was Biden, with his, incapacitated mental state at times, driving this policy versus, fully with it, criminal minds like Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan. And the answer to that, I think, will tell us a lot, about what's happened here. But the reality is this is the face of the American empire when it comes to policy on Israel. Rashid Khalidi, who is widely considered to be the leading U.S. historian on Palestine, one of the top historians in the world, who is actually quite careful in his comments on these issues, said that it is clear that Netanyahu is in charge of the American policy right now, that it's the tail wagging the dog. And, I'd resisted thinking that for a while, because I think it lets the U.S. off the hook when you say, oh, it's Israel running the policy. This is, a U.S. policy. But in this particular case, Netanyahu has put Biden into check and possibly mate with this situation now, because he's managed to endure and survive and receive U.S. weapons and support and defense for going on into 10 months now. The election is on the horizon. Biden is a severely weakened political candidate. And the reality is that even if they sign some sort of a ceasefire in this phased manner that looks like it's going to happen, it could be a paper tiger, because Netanyahu can resume the war at any time. Biden has made clear he's not going to cut off the weapons. He stretches it into November. Let's say Trump wins in November. Then what? You have lame duck Biden. What's he going to do? He is not going to have the last thing he does before he leaves office, cut off Israel. That's not going to happen. And then you start having these kind of Reagan-esque discussions between Trump and Netanyahu. And I wouldn't be shocked at all if there was a plan to relocate every Palestinian that manages to survive in Gaza to, under Trump and Kushner. They find some way to just get rid of them all. But that's not a way of saying, oh, but look what Trump is going to do. Biden made that possible. That's the fact that no one can escape. Biden has set this entire thing up.
Yeah. Just like Biden also allowed all of this to happen by not reversing any of Trump's decisions on Israel, like continuing along with Trump's policies on Israel. Trump greatly escalated this conflict by just taking the reins off Israel completely, in terms of moving the embassy to Jerusalem, in terms of the Abraham Accords, like setting up the Abraham Accords and having Jared Kushner be the point guy that completely sidestepped the Palestinians in this conversation. Biden could have gone back on any number of those things and maybe not like remove the embassy back, but the annexation, recognizing the permanent annexation of Golan Heights. Like all of this stuff allowed Israel to feel emboldened. And it is legitimately concerning that, this is the worst political instinct in this moment, at a time when international organs of justice are at odds with the American state, and all the American state is communicating in terms of defending Israel. Because even from the perspective of those, let's say I'm in the State Department for a brief moment in this hypothetical, like, I would be very concerned with Biden's mishandling of Israel, with Biden's understanding of foreign policy, because it greatly diminishes America's soft power capabilities in the future, and shows the rest of the world that America is asleep at the wheel when it comes to Israel, that Israel gets to do whatever it wants, and it puts them at odds with the rest of the Western world even.
Yeah, and not only did it embolden Israel, but it also pushed, and Jeremy had some of this in his first piece. Curious for his take on this. The Abraham Accords really pushed Hamas into a place of desperation for the Palestinian cause, because now you were getting to a place where you were going to have, if the Abraham Accords continued on, normalization with all the other Middle East countries with Israel, by completely sidestepping the Palestine question. That was Kushner's entire insight, and so then Biden picked up where Kushner left off. That's the incredible part. And so you have Hamas, sagging in popularity. The economy is completely in shambles, and the world is acting as though they're going to move on without ever grappling with this question. Just going to leave the situation as it is, with creeping annexation in the West Bank, and a tightening chokehold around Gaza. And so with that as the context, October 7th you don't know what's going to happen on October 7th, but you're basically over determining it to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I mean,
since
remember that for
go ahead.
20 plus. So yeah, just one point on that. For 20 plus years, the posture of the Arab nations and Muslim nations that had not normalized "quote unquote" relations with Israel was that any normalization would necessitate a resolution on the question of Palestine and Palestinian statehood. And of course, the Palestinian people feel utterly betrayed by so many of these Arab nations that have stood by as Israel has "quote unquote" mowed the lawn, seized their territory, consistently killing them, locking them up, implementing an apartheid state, putting the blockade on Gaza, engaging in collective punishment, putting people on a restricted calorie existence, and they do nothing. And then you have Trump starting to broker these agreements with Jared Kushner. Biden, as you say rightly, picks up the mantle, and 2 weeks before October 7th, Netanyahu appears at the United Nations to give a speech at the General Assembly. Almost everyone boycotted it. No one was there except his, minions. But he gave the speech anyway, and he is talking about the new Middle East, and what a change this is going to be. It's going to connect Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, and Israel is going to be this sort of new Silk Road. And he displays a map where Gaza and the West Bank do not exist as Palestinian lands. And I'm not saying that was the motivation for October 7th. I'm saying that Hamas's assessment from the end of the 2021 bombing, which Biden also supported, and then in 2 days after Biden called Netanyahu to tell him it was over, it was over. But for those 2 years, they watched and they were deeply concerned about Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia for its own purposes. The Saudis are not, are motivated by a number of factors here, including that they want to become a nuclear power. And there's a whole other track that the United States is dealing with the Saudis on that is linked to any agreement that they make with Israel. But there were indications that the Saudis were going to settle for some circumvention of Palestinian statehood in their negotiations with Israel. And Hamas, as Ryan said, was concerned about the internal situation in Gaza, was watching a ratcheting up, particularly under Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, of settler violence, which was sponsored by the state, of the defiling of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the single holiest site in Islam in Palestine. You had a decrepit, corrupt Palestinian authority under Mahmoud Abbas that was basically like a Bantustan, like a Vichy regime there that was doing the bidding of Israel, not only arresting people that Israel said were a security threat, but attacking labor unions, activists, dissidents, journalists, writers, deeply, deeply unpopular. And I think that Hamas felt that this was the historic moment where they needed to take action or it was finished. And so that's what I think the motivation was behind October 7th. They wanted to entirely shatter the paradigm, not only on Gaza, but to call the question on a Palestinian state. And they don't see, even if there is a ceasefire or an end to the intense slaughter that's happening in Gaza, my sense is that they believe that the world has changed now and there is no return, that this is the beginning of a march onward that they believe is going to end in victory against Israel. And I think some Israelis recognize that this is not something like 2021, 2014, 2009. This is far more serious. There is an incendiary situation in the West Bank right now. The conditions potentially for a third intifada are starting to present themselves. And if Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas were to openly endorse an intifada, then I think we would be looking at a very, very serious situation. On top of this genocide.
Yeah, and what is the expectation, really? I mean, 500 plus deaths in the West Bank since October 7. Many children, many of them children as well. Like it's just completely unacceptable. And you have former members of the Shin Bet when they do their like little woke tours, and they always come out and they're like, "Oh yeah, we hate the situation in the West Bank. Like we have to dial back on the situation in the West Bank." Like their calls have fallen on deaf ears time and time again. You have thousands of people being arrested, being permanently detained with no due process whatsoever, and it's understandable that it's a powder keg in the West Bank as well. By the way, while we were having this conversation, a chatter informed me that the International Court of Justice will deliver its advisory opinion in respect to the legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. This will happen on July 19th, on Friday at 3 p.m. So there's also that coming down. There was also reports of Benjamin Netanyahu saying that he's fearful to travel to, I believe it was Hungary even, that, in fears of due to not the ICJ, but the ICC's decision or the preliminary stages of the warrant application that is being processed at the moment for his arrest. That hasn't come down yet, but I suspect that will happen sometime soon, maybe even before his travel to the United States of America that's upcoming in July 24th, in a couple of weeks, as a matter of fact, to speak to the Congress, which is ridiculous. But, that's another glaring misstep, in my opinion, that harms America's soft power opportunities. Not that I care about that sort of thing. Ideologically, I'm not in favor of America having this much influence over the global stage. But like, even if you are someone who cares about that sort of thing, even if you're one of these like NATO guys, right? This is something that should be a cause for concern. But yeah, I don't know what this will look like. I don't know if you guys knew that this was coming. The ICJ. I
didn't know
ICJ.
that. I didn't know the timing, but yeah, they're moving more quickly than they typically tend to move. And I think one thing that's going on is that I've done some reporting on this. We'll have stuff over at Dropsite probably in a couple of weeks about the coordinated efforts around the world to bring charges. And so I think the ICC has competition here. Like the ICC. William Ruto, I think he was a Kenyan president now, is one of the first ones ever indicted by the ICC. But there were not people clamoring around the world to kind of go after Ruto. But in this case, like the world is outside of the United States so shocked at what's going on that there are prosecutors and judges all over that are looking at what kind of accountability could be coming, and so that could be why the ICC might be moving a little quicker than it has in the past. But the United States might end up being one of the few places where he can safely travel going forward.
Yeah, I mean that's probably all. That's probably all that they need. Like that's probably all Netanyahu needs. But that it's still a tremendous amount of pressure applied as Israel continues to become a pariah state for very good reasons.
Yeah.
This should have obviously happened at any number of different points over the course of the past 76 years of apartheid and ethnic cleansing, but it is happening now in a way that I don't think the Israeli public even fully comprehends. So Israel's motivations, Israel's actions show that they are not exactly aware of this, or maybe they are aware of it and they're trying to just like finish the job to the best of their ability, considering that, and this is another chatter from Israel who's bringing this up. Two notable recent decisions. First was the passing of all civil affairs in Area C to the deputy head of the CA, and appointed an appointee responsible not to the military but to Smotrich, who is a settler himself, the finance minister who's incredibly reactionary, alongside Itamar Ben-Gvir, for those of you who don't know, in the defense ministry. The second is a law that passed its first calling yesterday, allowing Israeli building enforcement in certain areas of Area B. Nothing creeping about this. This is rapid and de jure. Biden's complete silence here opens a window for more explicit declarative recognitions under Trump. Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
The way that basically works, actually, your audience is probably pretty familiar with this, but allowing Israeli authority in Area B means, so in order to kind of build, like in anywhere else, you need a permit if you're going to build, you're going to add a bathroom, add a spare bedroom to your house. What Israel does is basically make it impossible for Palestinians, homeowners, either to prove that they own the home or to get a permit to build this extra bedroom, or to put on, you want to put a back porch on, whatever. And so a lot of people, they do it anyway. Like, the
but
house
it's not
is
even
overcrowded. You need a bathroom.
Yeah, it's not even just bathrooms and bedrooms, by the way. It's wells, it's water wells. Like, it's very significant parts of infrastructure that like Palestinians need to survive.
So then the guy will show up at the door. Now that they have this authority, they'll be like, oh, hey, look, I don't see a permit for this well. I don't see a permit for this chair that you have out in the front yard. We're confiscating your property. And it's done legally. Like, this is, I'm an agent of the court here. We believe in the rule of law. Everybody out, settlers in. So, yeah, that's not good at all for anybody who's on the other end of that.
Yeah. And it seems like with the change of power in European allies, like America's close European allies, with the Labour Party in the UK, with Keir Starmer, unfortunately, leading the helm, but also with the new coalition government in France, which is openly and outwardly, especially with France Insoumise, being significantly more pro-Palestinian than prior leadership. You also run into you run into more American soft power diminishing in Europe specifically, or at least like on this issue alone, on the issue of Israel alone, like America getting pushed aside even further. Now, I don't know. I don't know what Keir Starmer will do. I suspect that he is probably going to continue being as outwardly pro-Israel as the previous government, especially with the weapons contracts that they have. But who knows? Who knows what happens there? Because Keir Starmer has made some post-election. He has made some interesting decisions in terms of like putting people in the positions of power that were very critical of Israel. So who knows? But
look at
go ahead, Trevor.
I mean, well, the limits of what we can expect from someone like a Keir Starmer, or even if Bernie Sanders, were making decisions for the United States. At the beginning, in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, and for several months, Sanders was his politics were not great on this. He's certainly critical of Netanyahu, but his his position on ceasefire was deeply problematic for a sustained period of time. And now what Bernie has shifted to is his entire criticism or critique of the genocidal Israeli war against the people of Gaza is it's Netanyahu's extremist policies. It's Netanyahu's extreme government. It's Netanyahu's extreme cabinet. This is a line that's been picked up then by Schumer and Pelosi. And it's kind of, this is the way that they've reconciled their way of criticizing it, that they're putting it all on the bad ship Netanyahu. And the thing that none of them want to talk about is that whether you had a so-called liberal government in Israel or you had Netanyahu, the policy would have been a massive war of annihilation against the people of Palestine that live in Gaza, and that's what none of these people want to talk about. It's easy, especially this late in the game of genocide, to start saying, "Oh my God, we need to end this," and it's all Netanyahu's fault. But the reality is that this was made possible because of politicians within the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And in the case of Britain, there's a slight difference. Jeremy Corbyn would have been militantly opposed to this. Jeremy Corbyn has a lifelong record of standing on the side of Palestinian liberation. He would have been, I think, a transformative figure. But Sanders himself gave us an indication of how he would have approached this. I don't think he would have been as catastrophic as Biden by any stretch of the imagination. But if that's the best that we have to offer, in terms of people that can get close to winning the presidency, it explains a lot about the policy.
No, absolutely. I agree. It's shocking to me that more Democrats and more like center left or center right politicians have not shifted their position in the same way that Bernie Sanders has to liberal Zionism in an effort to like defend the next steps forward into continuation of Israel's apartheid. It actually is, I think, a shocking display of the worst political instincts that these people have in positions of power, for sure. The only reason why I brought up Keir Starmer as a potential is because Starmer, obviously, when running for election, ahead of the election, time and time again reiterated his commitment to Israel and stated that, Israel has a right to defend itself, much like Bernie Sanders has as well, and that he would not pronounce that something is either genocide or not. But he also said that every country, including Israel, has to be properly held in account in the Court of International Law. David Lammy, the new foreign secretary, who is expected to visit Israel soon, broke ranks with the UK's official line in late May when he backed the International Criminal Court's independence after it sought arrest warrants for Israeli officials. We saw that from a lot of European leadership, including Germany, which has been super far right on the issue of Israel, where like the ICC decision was seen as fairly significant. And that all of these officials did openly say that the ICC does have jurisdiction and they are allowed to operate and they're allowed to continue with their application for an arrest warrant. Richard Hermer, the new Attorney General, is the reason why I'm bringing this up. However, chosen by Starmer, is one of the interesting appointments in the new government. He has criticized Israel. He specializes in human rights law. And he decried the former government's push to criminalize boycott campaigns and was among a group of small Jewish lawyers who wrote an open letter reminding Israel of its international obligations at the start of the war. So I think that is why, maybe I'm trying to be as hopeful and as optimistic as possible, but there is definitely, it seems, a little bit of a change of pace in the way that Keir Starmer has conducted himself before the election versus the decision making within the Labour Party in terms of appointment and even in terms of communicating certain positions, like Starmer hinting that Britain could recognize Palestine before US or Israel. This is today from The Telegraph. Prime Minister repeating calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and insisting UK's Middle East policy won't follow anyone else. This feels a little bit like a shift in the attitude that the Tory government had.
well, certainly it's a shift from the public posture of the Tory government, but again, we're entering now month 10 of the genocide. And
Yeah.
I think you're going to see the dam is going to break on this as as the historical legacy of what has taken place starts to become clearer and clearer. You can go back not that long ago to David Lammy making atrocious statements in defense of Israel,
Yeah.
promoting lies that were told, that some of which you cited, Hasan, earlier in this program.
Yeah.
I think it's, this is to an extent, we should welcome any shift to a position that has justice at its center for the Palestinian people, certainly.
Yeah.
But let's be clear that there is also cynical politicking here. There's an understanding of the tides of history and which direction that they're headed in. So, if Keir Starmer and others are going to take a moral position on this, an ethical position on this, that should be welcome. But we shouldn't forget what has happened the past 10 months with
Absolutely
these
not.
individuals.
You're right. You're 100% right.
So, but the nuance is important. But I think we have to keep that in mind, and we've seen Biden doing that too, where Biden has started to be more open in his denunciation of Netanyahu, and took some symbolic actions. But at the same time, none of this would have happened if these people had listened to those that actually understood what was happening before it became a genocide. And that's a huge part of the problem that we have.
Yeah. And make no mistake, of course, Starmer's rise to power within the ranks of the Labor Party directly came with the issue of Israel specifically. I mean, the Corbyn wing of the party was sabotaged, openly sabotaged by the more conservative Labor members that used cynically deployed the calls of anti-Semitism towards him and other more radical, more progressive members, more progressive wing of the Labor Party. So I'm not saying that I'm all too hopeful. I'm simply talking about this kind of communication being another instance where there is maybe some pressure points against American foreign policy and American dominance. Because if these countries do break away from the United States of America, even as like a means of PR to whitewash their previous actions, I think that moves the needle in a more hopeful direction. All things considered, in a direction that will hopefully bring about some kind of ceasefire in the short term.
Can I ask Ryan a question? Even though I talk to Ryan all day long, but it's something I haven't asked him that is related to this. You had this Bernie Sanders tape the other day, defending Biden and his candidacy, and AOC, came out backing Biden. What's going on with AOC and Bernie that they're doing this right now? That they're like, nope, Biden is our dude, ride or die.
My read is there's a couple things going on. One is that they understand and they have been told that nothing they say is going to influence Biden positively. And in fact, if they see if the left is seen as leading this charge, then actually it could have caused the censors like Schumer and Jeffries and others to dig in more. So that's the strategic element. Then there's their own little game theory where like nobody cares what they think, in the sense that if Biden does drop out and is replaced by somebody, everybody will forget what the hell the members of the squad and Bernie said. If by some chance he stays in and wins, which is getting to a nil possibility, then people will remember, oh yeah, they stuck with them. So some cynical calculation there. But the actual thing going on, I think, is related to the fact that Cori Bush and Ilhan Omar both have competitive primaries. And if you look at the way that, say, Summer Lee and Jamal Bowman ran their primaries, Summer Lee much more effectively, she didn't run as like, I'm a radical, I'm going to shake up the Democratic Party. But she ran for re-election hugging Joe Biden. Like, Democratic primary voters are loyal Democrats and are far more partisan than kind of Republicans are, actually. Like in the Republican primaries, everybody runs kind of against the Republican elites that don't even really exist anymore, but they all run against Mitt Romney. In the Democratic primary, Ilhan Omar is running ads with Joe Biden saying nice things about Omar, and Bush is, going to organize a lot of her campaign around, like, I fought for the IRA, I fought for all of this money that that I helped bring back to St. Louis, and so it just makes it awkward at that point to then be trashing. Or to be saying that Biden should step down when the ads that you're running on television are Biden endorsing you. So they're in this really weird spot where they have to hug him, get reelected. So I think that's actually secretly kind of what's driving a lot of that. Even though all the rest of it is also true.
Thank you for saying all of that, because I've been literally saying this nonstop to everyone in this community for the past week, and everyone has been yelling at me and saying I just love AOC so much, and that's why I'm just coping. Now that you've said it, I hope people will listen. Beyond that, I think there was another thing I wanted to mention that that plays off of exactly what you mentioned, is that with Jamal Bowman, we saw an unprecedented amount of money being dumped into this primary race, a historic amount. And obviously, it was AIPAC subsidiaries, but they didn't really talk about the issue of Israel or Jamal Bowman's radical positions on Israel at all. One thing that they talked about quite frequently was something that Jamal Bowman did in defense of Biden's policies, but they were able to successfully present this move where he originally voted against, it voted to not separate Biden's own policy in defense of Biden alongside the progressives as a way to claim that Jamal Bowman was not going to play ball with Joe Biden, and that he was actually a radical who was against Biden's policies. And that worked. That worked very well, which was ironic because, of course, Latimer had openly said that he would step aside and be at odds with Biden's policies, and he 100% will be at odds with Biden's policies if he becomes the representative in terms of, like, if the Biden administration wins and then they do push for some kind of tax increases. Latimer has openly said he is not going to allow that to happen. But regardless, in terms of the political calculation that the progressives are making, you're absolutely correct. I think that, there is nothing to lose for them when they come out in support of Biden, because they're already the progressive wing anyway.
Right. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And that was that vote on the infrastructure bill. And he voted no because, Manchin and Sinema and Gottheimer and others had not committed getting the rest of the agenda through. Although, they wanted the infrastructure, but not all the rest of Build Back Better. So it was the most cynical thing ever, because it was literally a vote in defense of the Biden agenda. And it was used as say, look at this disloyal guy who voted against infrastructure spending. How crazy is he? Got to get rid of him. And it's a sad reality that, Democratic primary voters might actually agree with the Sanders wing on a lot of things, but at any time that they get seen as being disloyal Democrats, they just walk away from them. It's a very difficult kind of terrain to try to organize in and win on.
Yeah. Well, guys, are there any things that you would like to discuss that you haven't gotten to yet before I
wanted to say something about the site that we're doing, about drop site. I was one of the people that co-founded the Intercept, and 11 years ago with Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras, and Ryan's been there for more than 7 years, was the DC bureau chief, and really was a really influential figure in broadening out the reach of the Intercept and building up a really serious coverage of politics in Washington. And of course, Ryan also does foreign policy and has been doing great work on Pakistan and also on Gaza. And we really made a run to try to, in our view, save that place. And there were internal disagreements over vision. The board, didn't want to take it in the direction that Ryan and I wanted to take it, and we left. And and we left to start something that we believe is going to be a lean, sustainable, hard-hitting news organization. that is focused on doing investigative journalism. And investigative journalism takes time. It costs money. We're starting from scratch. And we have some people that stepped up and gave us a modest amount of seed money to get this thing rolling. And it's a little bit scary when it's like jumping off a cliff, in the dark, and you don't know if you're going to hit water or sharp rocks. And that's sort of where we're at. But we've been overwhelmed by how many people have hit that subscribe button. We're at about almost 120,000 subscribers right now. That's total subscribers. That's not paid subscribers. We're seeing like a great uptick in people that are actually paying to subscribe. And the thing is, though, that comes with fear, or like uncertainty. It reminds you of what it was like to be a hungry young journalist. That you're in that game because you want to be there, because there's a passion burning in your heart. And I feel actually a sense of relief that we're starting from scratch, and that I'm doing this with Ryan, because I think we're on the same page about what we want to do. And for me, I feel like it's going back to my roots. I begged my way into an unpaid gig working for Amy Goodman at Democracy Now! And I literally would write her actual letters
My
and
queen.
say, if you have a dog, I'll walk your dog. And if you have a cat, I'll go feed your cat. And she either had to get a restraining order against me or like agree to like let me come and volunteer. And I get a little bit emotional when I think about it, because she had no reason to take a chance on me, and she did. And I've watched her build up what I think is the most important independent news program 5 days a week on radio and TV in this country. And what Ryan and I want to do is build not just an independent news organization, but a non-aligned news organization. And what we mean by that is, we're not interested in toxic turf wars with people. That doesn't help people in Gaza. That doesn't expose injustice. That doesn't help people who are struggling or suffering. And good journalism at its best saves people. It confronts bad guys. It takes big swings at the powerful with no fear or favor. And so, we want people to support this news organization. And it feels good to actually walk around knowing we're accountable to the people that support our journalism and read our journalism. So, you have a great crew of people. I love coming on this show because I get really thoughtful comments from people who've never heard of the work that I do or Ryan does. It's a totally different audience of people. And I have huge respect for what you're doing and the exposure to these kinds of issues that you're bringing to audiences that may not normally pay attention to it. And you have a great audience, and we'd love for them to join us as well at dropsitenews.com.
Yeah. How can what would be the best possible thing that people can do in this community for you guys at this moment?
But yeah, I mean, go if you go right there, dropsitenews.com, and sign up just to get the free emails. That's the first step. That's great, because when we have a story, it's going to get emailed out to you. If you can be a paying subscriber, you can do that. It's, I think, $9 a month or something like that. And that's the thing that makes it sustainable. If you're like a super rich Hasan fan, then we've got donate.dropsitenews.com, where you can actually it's tax deductible. We're a fiscally sponsored C3. It's a nonprofit news organization. So at donate.dropsitenews.com, you can make a tax deductible contribution. But what I also would like about that is that, to Jeremy's point, I like being accountable to this kind of audience. That's who I want us to be accountable to. And you may not know, you played a significant role in our kind of decision about what to do at the Intercept, because as it was getting hot internally, I reached out to you and also to the boys over at Chapo. I was like, look, if Jeremy and I went out independently and built something new, would you have our back? And both you guys immediately were like, yes. And what I see us as, and that gave us a lot of confidence, internally, and to move forward. And what I kind of see us as is the kind of investigative journalism arm of the Hasan Chapo axis, that crew needs needs an independent investigative news outlet that is producing material that is letting you know what's going on in the world. We can't produce at the volume of the New York Times, but we can pick our spots. We can hit them hard, and we can hit hit all the malevolent actors that are out there pretty hard, and we're going to get taken seriously, which is my favorite part of all this, because we're in this not just to like produce pretty articles, but to like produce work that has to be reckoned with by centers of power. So thank you for that. Yeah, for that, like that vote of confidence at a moment when we were kind of in the thick of it.
Of course,
it's all true. Let me just on one last note. There was a brief window of time when I was allowed on like CNN and MSNBC, and like I was on fairly regularly when I did Blackwater, about the mercenary company, especially when Bush was in power. They loved me on MSNBC. But if you look at how a lot of those big institutional media outlets are configured, they have their own kind of self-licking ice cream cone, where they're in an enclosed media ecosystem. The Washington Post people are on Morning Joe, or like they're all doing their thing, and they create this sort of echo chamber of their own. And I was talking to a friend about it today when I was explaining your show, Hasan, and I was saying that, like, in the same way that it's it's important that there's cross-pollination with like-minded media organizations. What Ryan is saying is true. We can build an informal network of non-aligned media institutions that share some basic sort of spirit and ideas, and you create a different ecosystem, because the world has radically changed. No one is watching those shows. No, people are not reading those newspapers.
Yeah.
They're not reaching new audiences. They're not thinking outside of the box. This stuff that we did on Hamas, they should have been doing this for the past 10 months.
Yeah,
why no one's thinking to say, like, hey, let's try to understand. We're told these are the new Nazis, that these people are the greatest threat in the world, so much of a threat that the US has to facilitate a genocide. Maybe we should talk to those people. So I think what we have here is an opportunity to sort of move away from some of the toxicity that helps no one, find the common ground that we have, and build our own ecosystem of non-aligned media entities.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately, in domestic affairs, we saw this with East Palestine, Ohio, that when there's enough of a stink that is brought up on TikTok and other places outside of the sphere of influence of mainstream media, it actually causes mainstream media, which obviously has an interest in maintaining its veneer of legitimacy and credibility, to cover those stories with a different approach. Because East Palestine, Ohio was a train derailment. There are 1,000 train derailments that occur every year. So, of course, no news editor at a serious media outlet is ever going to cover it. They're not going to look at that. They're going to be like, what do you mean? There's 3 of them a fucking day. But once that became like a serious point of contention, and the story itself actually became, why is mainstream media not talking about this? It kind of forced the hands of CNN and MSNBC and all of these other places to actually cover this train derailment and the chemical spill that actually harmed the lives of these people in this small town. And I think what's going on in Palestine with the Israeli ethnic cleansing campaign is almost identical. That for the past 20, 30, 40 years, American mainstream media has rarely ever discussed the issue of the Israeli apartheid on terms that ever gave dignity or humanity or even recognition to the Palestinians as human beings, right? And now, because of the groundswell, because of the previously unimaginable amount of real momentum, real support, and posturing coming from the younger generation, the attitudes that the younger generation has, and the reality that they see on the ground, due to all of these incredibly brave independent journalists and outlets like Al Jazeera, but like Palestinian people just being able to just show what is happening to them in real time. It is in my opinion, causing mainstream media to have to cover it in a way that they previously never had to. And you see that they ran with, in early October, they ran with the contextualization of the violence narrative. Every single time Israel would blow up a hospital or a school or something, you would have Jonathan Concuncrius or whatever the fuck that dude's name is, go on CNN and immediately contextualize it and frame it as a totally permissible, dare I say, morally righteous act that they had to blow up this school. And you don't see that anymore. You don't see that as much anymore in mainstream media. And that is because of the obvious death toll and how unimaginably cruel Israel has been. But beyond that, I think it's because there is a lot of people an entire generation of people who no longer trust no longer trust CNN, no longer trust MSNBC, no longer trust the New York Times when it comes to covering foreign policy. And they have to try and make up for that. They have to try and at least claw on to some shred of credibility. So I think what you guys are doing and what I try to promote here will inevitably cause better journalism to occur in mainstream media as well, hopefully.
Yes, because the ecosystem that Jeremy's describing, to the extent that it exists now, it actually includes elements of all of those newsrooms. There might be somebody sitting, I guarantee you actually, that there are people right now.
Wait, Ryan. You're muted or something.
Ryan, you muted yourself. There are people right now, you said, and then after that it muted.
Unmute it. Now you click unmute. Ryan and I are old.
Ryan, you just muted yourself. There it is.
All right. There are people right now as we speak, in the CNN newsroom, watching this stream, probably. The ecosystem.
Oh yeah.
Overlaps into and creates friction inside major media and gives succor to the people who are in there kind of waging the good fight. The fact that we were able to report on the New York Times internally because so many people from the New York Times wanted to speak to us.
Oh,
so yeah, you're exactly, I think you're exactly right. It put, and we and they then put pressure on the kind of old guard, and it does kind of come out in the end of the coverage. It's still not good coverage, and it's not coverage they're happy about, but it's less bad than it was. And it's just at the beginning because this ecosystem is growing and that one is shrinking. And also politicians are noticing, which is going to cause problems for the major media. Politicians notice that independent media is now just as good a way to reach the American public as CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, maybe even better in a lot of respects. And that's going to cause all sorts of problems for the major media too, because then they'll lose that. They rely on the myth, and once the myth is gone, all they have left is their ability to break news that the public wants. But right now, they don't have to do that.
Yeah. No,
I mean, just looking at your comments, at the commenters on the side, it's really interesting. I mean, I can barely keep up with it, but I've noticed as we've been chatting over the past hour, the crowdsourcing of information. I mean, there's a bunch of really intelligent notes that get dropped in this, and then there's things that I don't even understand the language. But
they're
it's really a fascinating. No, but there's actually, I've stopped it at a couple of points and read what people said, and there's really interesting comments. It's a very interesting alternative to the Chiron news stream that flows under CNN or MSNBC or what have you. Anyway, I know we've taken up a lot of your time and your audience's time.
No, of course.
But one other thing is if people have money to spare and they want to subscribe, that's amazing. But we're not going to put our content behind a paywall. Ryan and I are both committed to information should be free to everybody. And we're in this because also we believe journalism at its best should be a public service. But if people have the money to support us, we're deeply honored to have your trust and hope we, preemptively earn it and then earn it after you've paid attention to us for a while.
No, absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on. And once again, thank you for all the phenomenal work you do. I hope that I hope that there was a lot of support from this community. I mean, I of course, I have uncritical support for you guys always. So I'm very excited to see what you guys are reporting on in the future.
Appreciate it, brother.
All right. Thank you. Thank you
Thanks
for coming
so much.
on.
Keep up the great work.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Hey, guys.
All right. That was Ryan Grimm and Jeremy Scahill, formerly of The Intercept, now at dropsitenews.com. Go support their journalism, of course. They are phenomenal, as you already know. Some of my favorite guests to have on. And yeah, they're doing brilliant work.